Hi everyone, welcome to Coders Place YouTube channel. In this video we will see some most asked CSS interview questions and answers for beginners. So let's get started. Question 1. What is CSS? Cascading Style Sheets, fondly referred to as CSS, is a simply designed language intended to simplify the process of making web pages presentable. CSS allows you to apply styles to web pages. More importantly, CSS enables you to do this independent of the HTML that makes up each web page. CSS is easy to learn and understood, but it provides powerful control over the presentation of an HTML document. Question 2. Why do we use CSS? We use CSS because of the following reasons. CSS saves time. You can write CSS once and reuse the same sheet on multiple HTML pages. Easy maintenance. To make a global change, simply change the style, and all elements in all the web pages will be updated automatically. Search engines. CSS is considered a clean coding technique, which means search engines won't have to struggle to read its content. Superior styles to HTML. CSS has a much wider array of attributes than HTML, so you can give a far better look to your HTML page in comparison to HTML attributes. Offline browsing. CSS can store web applications locally with the help of an offline cache. Using of this we can view offline websites. Question 3. What is the current version of CSS? CSS 3 is the latest version of CSS. Question 4. What are the advantages of CSS? CSS plays an important role. By using CSS you simply got to specify a repeated style for an element once and use it multiple times because CSS will automatically apply the required styles. The main advantage of CSS is that style is applied consistently across a variety of sites. One instruction can control several areas which are advantageous. Web designers need to use a few lines of programming for every page, improving site speed. Cascading sheet not only simplifies website development but also simplifies maintenance, as a change of one line of code affects the whole website and maintenance time. It is less complex, therefore the effort is significantly reduced. It helps to form spontaneous and consistent changes. CSS changes are device-friendly. With people employing a batch of various range of smart devices to access websites over the web, there's a requirement for responsive web design. It has the power for repositioning. It helps us to determine the changes within the position of web elements that are there on the page. These bandwidth savings are substantial figures of insignificant tags that are indistinct from a mess of pages. Easy for the user to customize the online page. It reduces the file transfer size. Question 5. List the CSS frameworks. The best CSS frameworks are: 1. Bootstrap. 2. Foundation. 3. Bulma. 4. UIKit. 5. Semantic UI. 6. Materialize. 7. Pure. 8. Tailwind CSS. Question 6. What are the disadvantages of CSS? CSS 1 up to CSS 3 result in creating confusion among web browsers. With CSS, what works with one browser might not always work with another. The web developers need to test for compatibility, running the program across multiple browsers. There exists a scarcity of security. After making the changes we need to confirm the compatibility if they appear. A similar change affects all the browsers. The programming language world is complicated for non-developers and beginners. Different levels of CSS, i.e. CSS, CSS2, CSS3 are often quite confusing. Browser compatibility. Some style sheets are supported and some are not. CSS works differently on different browsers. E and Opera support CSS as different logic. There might be cross-browser issues while using CSS. There are multiple levels that create confusion for non-developers and beginners. Question 7. What is the syntax for CSS? A CSS style rule consists of a selector, property, and its value. The selector points to the HTML element where CSS style is to be applied. The CSS property is separated by semicolons. Syntax. Selector then in curly brackets. Property, value. Question 8. In how many ways can we add CSS to our HTML file? Cascading Style Sheet CSS is used to set the style in web pages that contain HTML elements. It sets the background color, font size, font family, color, etc. properties of elements on a web page. There are three types of CSS which are given below. Inline CSS. Inline CSS contains the CSS property in the body section attached with the element known as inline CSS. This kind of style is specified within an HTML tag using the style attribute. Internal or embedded CSS. This can be used when a single HTML document must be styled uniquely. The CSS rule set should be within the HTML file in the head section, i.e. the CSS is embedded within the HTML file. External CSS. External CSS contains a separate CSS file which contains only style property with the help of tag attributes, for example class, id, heading, etc. CSS property is written in a separate file with CSS extension and should be linked to the HTML document using the link tag. This means that for each element, style can be set only once and that will be applied across web pages. Question 9. Which type of CSS holds the highest priority? Inline CSS has the highest priority, then comes internal/embedded followed by external CSS which has the least priority. Multiple style sheets can be defined on one page. If for an HTML tag, styles are defined in multiple style sheets, then the below order will be followed. As inline has the highest priority, any styles that are defined in the internal and external style sheets are overridden by inline styles. Internal or embedded stands second in the priority list and overrides the styles in the external style sheet. External style sheets have the least priority. If there are no styles defined either in the inline or internal style sheet, then external style sheet rules are applied for the HTML tags. Question 10. What are CSS selectors? CSS selectors. CSS selectors are used to selecting HTML elements based on their element name, id, attributes, etc. It can select one or more elements simultaneously. Element selector. The element selector in CSS is used to select HTML elements which are required to be styled. In a selector declaration, there is the name of the HTML element, and the CSS properties which are to be applied to that element is written inside the brackets. Syntax. Element name then in curly brackets. CSS property. Id selector. The hashtag id selector is used to set the style of the given id. The ID attribute is the unique identifier in an HTML document. The id selector is used with the hash character. Syntax. Hashtag id name then in curly brackets. CSS property. Class selector. The class selector is used to select all elements which belong to a particular class attribute. To select the elements with a particular class, use the character with specifying the class name. The class name is mostly used to set the CSS property to the given class. Syntax. Class name then in curly brackets. CSS property. Question 11. How can we add comments in CSS? Comments are the statements in your code that are ignored by the compiler and are not executed. Comments are used to explain the code. They make the program more readable and understandable. Comments can be single line or multi-line. Below is the correct syntax. Question 12. What does the A in red bar mean? RGBA contains A, alpha, which specifies the transparency of elements. The value of alpha lies between 0.0 to 1.0, where 0.0 represents fully transparent and 1.0 represents not transparent. Syntax. Question 13. What are CSS HSL colors? HSL stands for hue, saturation, and lightness respectively. This format uses the cylindrical coordinate system. Hue is the degree of the color wheel. Its value lies between 0 to 360, where 0 represents a red, 120 represents green and 240 represents a blue color. Saturation, it takes a percentage value, where 100% represents completely saturated, while 0% represents completely unsaturated, gray. Lightness, it takes a percentage value, where 100% represents white, while 0% represents black. Syntax. Question 14. What are CSS backgrounds? List the properties. The CSS background properties are used to define the background effects for elements. CSS background properties are as follows. Background color. This property specifies the background color of an element. Background image. This property specifies an image to use as the background of an element. By default, the image is repeated so it covers the entire element. Background repeat. By default, the background image property repeats the image both horizontally and vertically. Background attachment. This property is used to fix the background image. The image will not scroll with the page. Background position. This property is used to set the image to a particular position. Question 15. What are the different CSS border properties? CSS border properties allow us to set the style, color, and width of the border. Border style. The border style property specifies the type of border. None of the other border properties will work without setting the border style. Border width. Border width sets the width of the border. The width of the border can be in px, pt, cm or thin, medium and thick. Border color. This property is used to set the color of the border. Color can be set using the color name, hex value, or RGB value. If the color is not specified, border inherits the color of the element itself. Question 16. Can we add an image as a list item marker? To add an image as the list item marker in a list, we use the list style image property in CSS. Syntax. List style image, none, URL, initial, inherit. Question 17. What is the difference between margin and padding? First point. Margin is used to create space around elements and padding is used to create space around elements inside the border. Second point. We can set the margin property to auto but we cannot set the padding property to auto. Third point. In margin property we can allow negative or float number but in padding we cannot allow negative values. Fourth point. Margin and padding target all the four sides of the element. Margin and padding will work without the border property also. Question 18. What does margin, 40px, 100px, 120px, 80px signify? CSS margins are used to create space around the element. We can set the different sizes of margins for individual sides, top, right, bottom, left. Margin properties can have the following values. Length in cm, px, pt, etc. with % of the element. Margin calculated by the browser, auto. Therefore, margin, 40px, 100px, 120px, 80px signifies top equals 40px, right equals 100px, bottom equals 120px, left equals 80px. Question 19. What is CSS border and outline? CSS border properties allow us to set the style, color, and width of the border. CSS outline property allows us to draw a line around the element, outside the border. Question 20. What is the difference between CSS border and outline? Differences. Unlike borders, outlines don't allow us to set each edge to a different width, or set different colors and styles for each edge. An outline is the same on all sides. Outlines cannot be circular. Outlines do not take up space, because they are always placed on top of the box of the element. Question 21. How can we format text in CSS? CSS text formatting properties are used to format text and style text. CSS text formatting includes the following properties. 1. Text color. 2. Text alignment. 3. Text decoration. 4. Text transformation. 5. Text indentation. 6. Letter spacing. 7. Line height. 8. Text direction. 9. Text shadow. 10. Word spacing. 22. How can we hide an element in CSS? The style display property is used to hide the content of HTML DOM by accessing the DOM element using JavaScript/jQuery. To hide an element, set the style display property to none. Question 23. What is CSS Box Model? The CSS Box Model is a container that contains multiple properties including borders, margin, padding, and the content itself. It is used to create the design and layout of web pages. It can be used as a toolkit for customizing the layout of different elements. The web browser renders every element as a rectangular box according to the CSS Box Model. Box Model has multiple properties in CSS. Some of them are given below. 1. Borders. 2. Margins. 3. Padding. 4. Content. Border area. It is the area between the box's padding and margin. Its dimensions are given by the width and height of the border. Margin area. This area consists of space between border and margin. The dimensions of the margin area are the margin box width and the margin box height. It is useful to separate the element from its neighbors. Padding area. It includes the element's padding. This area is actually the space around the content area and within the border box. Its dimensions are given by the width of the padding box and the height of the padding box. Content area. This area consists of content like text, images, or other media content. It is bounded by the content edge and its dimensions are given by content box width and height. Question 24. What does display inline block do? Inline block. This feature uses both properties, block and inline. So, this property aligns the div inline, but the difference is it can edit the height and the width of the block. Basically, this will align the div both in the block and inline fashion. Question 25. What is the difference between display, none and visibility, hidden? Both of the property is quite useful in CSS. The visibility, hidden, property is used to specify whether an element is visible or not in a web document, but the hidden elements take up space in the web document. The visibility is a property in CSS that specifies the visibility behavior of an element, and display none property is used to specify whether an element is exist or not on the website. Syntax. Visibility property. Visibility, visible vertical bar, hidden, collapse, initial, inherit. Display property. Display, none, inline, block, inline block. So, the difference between display, none, and visibility, hidden, right from the name itself we can tell the difference as display, none, completely gets rid of the tag, as it had never existed in the HTML page, whereas visibility, hidden, just makes the tag invisible. It will still be on the HTML page occupying space, it's just invisible. Question 26. What does the CSS float property do? Float is a CSS property written in a CSS file or directly in the style of an element. The float property defines the flow of content. Below are the types of floating properties. Float, left, it is used to float elements on the left side of the container. Float, right, it is used to float element on the right side of the container. Float, inherit, the element inherits the floating property of its parent, div, table, etc. Float, none, element is displayed as it is, default. Question 27. What is CSS overflow? The CSS overflow controls the big content. It tells whether to clip content or to add scroll bars. The overflow contains the following property: visible, hidden, scroll and auto. 1. Visible, the content is not clipped and is visible outside the element box. 2. Hidden, the overflow is clipped and the rest of the content is invisible. 3. Scroll, the overflow is clipped but a scroll bar is added to see the rest of the content. The scroll bar can be horizontal or vertical. 4. Auto, it automatically adds a scroll bar whenever it is required. Question 28. What are the various positioning properties in CSS? The position property in CSS tells about the method of positioning for an element or an HTML entity. There are 5 different types of position properties available in CSS. 1. Fixed. 2. Static. 3. Relative. 4. Absolute. 5. Sticky. Question 29. How can we add gradients in CSS? There are 2 types of gradients. 1. Linear gradients. It includes the smooth color transitions to going up, down, left, right, and diagonally. A minimum of 2 colors are required to create a linear gradient. More than 2 color elements can be possible in linear gradients. The starting point and the direction are needed for the gradient effect. Syntax. 2. CSS radial gradients. A radial gradient differs from a linear gradient. It starts at a single point and emanates outward. By default, The first color starts at the center position of the element and then fades to the end color towards the edge of the element. Fade happens at an equal rate until specified. Syntax. Question 30. Can we add 2D transformations to our project using CSS? Yes, we can. A transformation modifies an element by its shape, size, and position. It transforms the elements along the x-axis and y-axis. There are 6 main types of 2D transformations which are listed below. 1. Translate 2. Rotate 3. Scale 4. Skewx 5. Skewy 6. Matrix. Question 31. Can we add 3D transformations to our project using CSS? Yes, it allows changing elements using 3D transformations. In 3D transformation, the elements are rotated along the x-axis, y-axis, and z-axis. There are 3 main types of transformation which are listed below. 1. Rotate x. 2. Rotate 3. Rotate as. Question 32. What does the CSS Box Sizing property do? The Box Sizing CSS property defines how the user should calculate the total width and height of an element, i.e. padding and borders, are to be included or not. Syntax. Box Sizing, Content Box or Border Box. Property Values. Content Box. This is the default value of the Box Sizing property. In this mode, the width and height properties include only the content. Border and padding are not included in it, i.e. if we set an element's width to 200 pixels, then the element's content box will be 200 pixels wide, and the width of any border or padding will be added to the final rendered width. Border box. In this mode, the width and height properties include content, padding, and borders, i.e. if we set an element's width to 200 pixels, that 200 pixels will include any border or padding we added, and the content box will shrink to absorb that extra width. This typically makes it much easier to size elements. Question 33. What is @keyframes used for? Keyframes are the foundations with the help of which CSS animations works. They define the display of the animation at the respective stages of its whole duration. For example, in the following code, the paragraph changes its color with time. At 0% completion, it is red, at 50% completion it is of orange color, and at full completion, i.e. at 100%, it is brown. Question 34. What is meant by universal selector? The selector in CSS is used to select all the elements in an HTML document. It also selects all elements which are inside under another element. It is also called the universal selector. Question 35. How can we give a shadow effect to our text in CSS? The approach of this article is to add a shadow using the text shadow property in CSS. This property accepts a list of a comma-separated list of shadows to be applied to the text. The default value of the text shadow property is none. Thanks for watching us. If you like our content, then please share it to your friends and subscribe for more.
खत्म।